All right, hello Chase Oaks. Good to see you guys, and those here at the Legacy campus, as well as our other campuses at Sloan Creek and Woodbridge and Espanol, everybody online as we kick off not only a new year, but also a new series called Pick One. And that's about the dilemma of decision making, that we all face that dilemma all the time. And we want to do what we know consequences, are attached to decisions, and so we want to get it right. And, what is God's will? How does God guide? How does that work? That's what we'll be talking about through the series. And I actually have a dilemma today that I want to get your help with, okay? And that dilemma, I don't know if everybody knows this. If you're new, you don't. But I happen to be an Alabama fan from there and everything. And this is a pretty big week if you're an Alabama fan with winning the national championship Monday night. And so one of my dilemmas, or my dilemma this week, has been how big of a deal do I make about it? Because it's when you're an Alabama guy, well, that's awesome. But if you're not, then it can be annoying. And I even have people every year that tell me they're not going to go to church the week after or whenever we win a national championship because it's so annoying. So I just need your help on this. How big of a deal should I make? So, for example, should I mention that out of the 9 years of the BCS era, this is the 5th national championship for Alabama, or not? Or should I let it go? Or this is the 17th national championship of all time for Alabama, which the runner-up on that is Notre Dame at 12, which is cute, but that's Alabama 17. And or do I just let it go? Or whenever this happens, Peter, you can help me out here. I'll bring out the foam, Alabama #1 finger, but that seems pretty over the top, right? So maybe not. Or, my brother gave me a pair for Christmas of these Alabama, these are shoes that Nike makes for the team and coaches and stuff. And they're pretty over the top. So should I wear them or not? So I just need your help. Should I make a big deal about it or just let it go? Tell me. Okay, mostly I'm here to let it go. There's a few making big deals, so I'm just going to let it go. I'm not going to do all that. So I appreciate your help. I really do. That comes in handy. Now we do face dilemmas all the time, right? And in fact, I looked at a USA Today article, and I don't know how they figured this out, but their estimate or their research found that the average American makes 35,000 decisions every day. Isn't that crazy? 35,000 decisions. That's pretty overwhelming. Now, of course, most of those decisions we're not sweating. We're not even thinking about. We're just making decisions all the time. But every once in a while, probably daily, there's one or two decisions that we know are a big deal. And certainly at certain times in our life, some of you are at one of those times where you have a problem to solve or a choice to make, a crossroads that you're at. That, man, it's a big decision, and it has big consequences. And man, I want to know, what does God want me to do? But the truth is, it's not just the big decisions that have consequences. Often it's the small decisions, or the ones that seem small at the time, that actually can have huge consequences in our life that we see later. For example, 31 years ago now, it's hard to believe it's been that long, I was in college. And I made the decision, this was in the summer, I was working at a church in Huntsville, Alabama, where I grew up. And there was a bunch of our friends from college who were down at the beach in Panama City doing with a campus ministry there for the summer. And they were doing this outreach thing on a weekend. And so I was invited by some friends to say, hey, let's go down there and just hang out with them for the weekend. And it was kind of a last-minute thing, and I think, well, I could get somebody to cover my stuff on the weekend, and am I going to do that or not? And I decided, well, why not? I'll do it. Small decision, but that's where I saw Christy Bauman, who's now Christy Jones, and who became my wife, and that's where our dating relationship started, and all of that. And just think about, had I not made that small decision that many years ago, how sad and lonely and pitiful she would be. All these years, and or me. But it's even small decisions can make a huge difference in our life. So how do we make decisions within the will of God, and how do we know God's guidance? And we're going to be talking about that through the series. And today we're going to see a principle that is absolutely vital if we want to live by God's will, if we want to be guided by God. In fact, if you and I don't get this one, there's no reason to talk about anything else in the series. If we don't get this, then we'll never really know the guidance of God in a practical way. It's in the basic principle today. It's simple, but it's very profound. Is the principle of the path. There's a book by that name I stole the title from by a guy named Andy Stanley, The Principle of the Path. But it's all over the Bible. And the idea of the principle of the path is that as much as our decisions matter, and that's what we get fixated on in the will of God, there's something that matters more. The decisions do matter and God does guide, but our path matters more, and God guides those who are on the path. Our path, more than our specific decisions, determine our destination. We get fixated on individual decisions, but it's actually our path, our direction, that determines our destination even more. And whenever I think about that, there's an experience that happened, again, a long time ago. This wasn't quite 31 years ago. This was in the 90s. But I was going up to Arkansas to speak, and I flew into Little Rock. We have a sister church there called Fellowship Bible Church Little Rock. If you're ever up there, it's a great place. And the pastor met me. His name at the time, pastor, was Robert. And we're going off into just out in the middle of nowhere, Arkansas, to this conference center where there's a group of people who start churches, church planters, they call them, in training. And so I was going to go and help with that and speak with them. So we get in the car. Now, this was to go out to this place in the middle of nowhere. Now, this was so long ago. It was before smartphones. Believe it or not, it was before Google Maps. It was before people had GPSs and all that. And we used these things called maps. You ever heard of those? They're like paper, or you had to know where you're going. We didn't have a map because he was confident. Oh, I know exactly. I've been there lots, and all that. So we're driving, and then we're talking, not really paying attention. And he looks around and he's like, Jeff, I have no idea where we are. Like, we're on this little 2-lane road in the middle of nowhere. He's like, I think we're still in Arkansas, but I don't even know that. Like, I really don't know where we are. So we drive up to this old gas station, and it was this old, dilapidated. The pumps didn't work anymore, hadn't worked in years. It had a little service bay and this old dilapidated gas station. We go up, and there's an old dilapidated guy out front and sitting on this rusty chair, and he's chewing tobacco and spitting into a little styrofoam cup. And we get out, and Robert says, yes, we're from Little Rock. We're trying to get to this conference center, which is in this little town, name the town, and I'm just hoping you know where that is, and if you could help us find it, because we're pretty lost. And he kind of paused, and and he was chewing, so he spit into his cup, and then he said, "Well, yeah, I know where that is, and I can help you, but first I got a question for you." I said, "Well, sure." He said, "Well, if you were trying to go there, why'd you come here? Because if you were trying to go there, you should never have come here. You'll never get there by coming here." And Robert said, "Well, I'm sure that's true. That's why we kind of need your help." And he said, "Well, you made it a lot harder by coming here." He said, "Well, yeah, we know, but, can you help us?" And so then he started with his directions, and I got cracked up. You know how in situations where you don't want to be rude, but you get tickled, and then you can't stop yourself from laughing? That I got in one of those, because he started to give him direct, but there were directions like this. He said, "Well, you want to go back the way you came, about 20, 30 miles or so, and you're going to go through a little town. And when you're in that little town, don't do anything but just keep going through it. And then after that, you'll pass a road. Keep going through that road. But you'll get to another road after that, and you want to turn left. And then you go about 5 or 6 miles, you'll see a farmhouse, and there's a big light pole, and you turn right after that light pole. And I could tell Robert, he was already glazing over. He wasn't paying attention anymore, and I got cracked up, and I was acting like I was sneezing and coughing, or something like that. And we eventually did get there, but there's been a lot of times in my life since that experience, I've thought about his words, especially when I've gotten off path, which is, if you were trying to get there, then why'd you come here? Because you're never going to get there if you're on the path to here, right? It's our path, it's our direction that determines more than anything else our destination. A lot of times we think it's about our decision, and our decisions matter. We'll talk about that next week. But there's something that matters even more than our decisions, and that is our direction. Our direction determines our destination. And we're going to see that illustrated today. Our path determines our destination more than our individual decisions do. And by the way, we're going to talk about getting on the path, and that is God's path for us, but every one of us are already on a path. The principle of the path is already at work in every one of our lives, whether we realize it or not. We have no clue, maybe, that that's happening, but the pattern of our life in the path that we're on is leading somewhere in every area of our life. And every once in a while, most people never stop to think about, where am I headed? Like, this is a thing about decisions, this series, but I think for most people, indecision is not our problem. For most people, the problem is we seldom stop and think about, hey, I'm making lots of decisions, but where am I headed? Like where's this headed? It's also important to understand the principle of the path because God guides those who are on the path. If we want to be guided by God, when I say on the path, I mean this is how God's guidance works in the Bible. It's that God has already revealed his will in a general sense, in a big way. He's already revealed it. He's told us this is the way of wisdom. This is the path of wisdom. And he invites us to know him and to be on this path with him where we bend to his better way. And that will lead in all areas of life to a good destination. And for those who are on the path, he will guide our individual decisions. But it's up to us to be on the path. Now, we're going to see that illustrated today in the Old Testament. So if you turn with me, or if you're a Bible turner or in your Bible app, we're going to be in 1 Samuel 28. I'll be reading them too if you want to cruise. But in 1 Samuel 28, is a biblical character in the Old Testament named Saul. And in this series, it's really kind of built around, with the exception of next week, which is a little different as we talk about decisions next week. It's going to be built around two Sauls in the Bible. There's an Old Testament Saul, who's the first king of the nation of Israel, God's people in the Old Testament era. And then in the rest of it will be built around the New Testament Saul, whose name is changed to Paul after he becomes a Christ follower. And we'll see that too. But today we're going old school. Today we're going Old Testament, and we're going to see the principle of the path in this guy named Saul, who was the first king of God's people in the Old Testament, the nation of Israel. And we're also going to see in this story another character. You have the king, who was important, but also the prophet. Because in the Old Testament era, that's how God guided his people, is through prophets. And prophets were people who were like spokesmen for God. So if you had the king who led the people, and then you had the prophet who was the one connected to God, who would get the word from God. And if you're the king, that's who you went to for guidance from God. And then you had priests who helped people connect to God that way. And we're going to hear a little bit about all of them. So when the prophet, Samuel is his name, that we're going to see in this story, he's the one who anoints Saul to be king. And when he does, he tells him, okay, you're the king of God's people, and it's up to you. It's going to go well for you if you get on the path. He says, if you will fear the Lord and obey his voice and not rebel against the command of the Lord, it'll go well for you. You will lead you and the whole nation to a good destination. If not, however, it's not going to end well, right? Because whatever path we're on is leading somewhere. And this is a great way to word the principle of the path. When it says fear the Lord, it doesn't mean like scared of God. Whenever you hear his name, you scream or something or run away. It's fear the Lord in the Bible. You could use the word respect, submit to, yield to. You're like, hey, I get it. God is way wiser than me. And his opinion matters more than anybody's, certainly even more than mine. And all my friends and culture, whatever. And even if it doesn't jibe with me, what God says in the Word, in the Bible, I'm going to yield to it anyway because I submit to him. I fear him. I'm on the path of obedience. And that's what it means to be on the path. Now, if Saul was ever on the path, he wasn't on it very long. In fact, he had a very predictable pattern in his life. It's a pretty typical pattern for people. And that is he would get some guidance from God from Samuel the prophet, and he would hear that. But then he would do kind of whatever he wanted to do. So something else sounded better. Another path sounded better. And so he would kind of do what Samuel said, but kind of not, and go on his own path. That predictably would lead to trouble because alternative paths lead to trouble. He would get in trouble and be like, what am I going to do? And he'd go to Samuel, I need a quick fix, I need a bailout, and I need you to help me. What do I do now? And then he would do a bunch of sacrifices, which they did in the Old Testament, and did a bunch of sacrifices to try to honor God and make it all good with God. And I say, oops, I'm sorry, but does this make us all good? And God is going to tell him, no, that's not the way it works. In fact, if you ever heard the phrase, you've been around church for a while, you may have heard the phrase, to obey is better than sacrifice. And that was God talking to Saul through the prophet Samuel. Because he's saying, dude, quit going down your own path, getting in trouble and doing sacrifice. That's not what I'm interested in. Just get on the path. To obey is better than sacrifice. As the leader of God's people, just get on the path. Now, but that was not his pattern. And so what we're going to see in this story is, over the years, that God decides he's so frustrated with Saul not ever being on the path as a leader of God's people, he fires him. And he says, dude, you're fired. You're voted off the island. You can't be the king anymore. And I'm going to raise up a new king. And Saul figures out it's David. And eventually he's told it's David who's going to be the next king. But instead of accepting that, okay, you're God, you can name whoever you want, I'm going to help that happen, he resists it because he doesn't want to give up the throne. And for some years, he fixates not on leading God's people, but on trying to find David and kill him. And there's this cat and mouse game that goes on. And in the middle of that is when he gets in trouble. And what happens is the nations around him are getting really powerful because he's not fixated on being a king. He's fixated on killing David. So their economy's not good. Their army is not been paid attention to. They don't have very good weapons. They're not very big and all that kind of stuff. But his nations around him, man, they've been rocking it. And the Philistines are his biggest enemy, and they've got their economy's working. Their military is strong. They've got way better weapons, way better training, way better technology. And they decide they're going to attack Israel. And he freaks out because he should. When Saul saw the Philistine army as they amassed, and he had his little army, he was afraid and terror filled his heart. He knew from a human perspective, yeah, we can't win this. We're going to get creamed. And in the past, he would go to Samuel. Samuel was like his magic 8-ball. Whenever he needed to know God's will, he would go to Samuel and shake him up and, get the answer. But in this case, he's got a real problem because there's no more Samuel. A couple verses earlier, we're told this. Now Samuel was dead, and all Israel had mourned for him and buried him in his own town of Ramah. Saul had expelled the mediums and spiritists from the land. So now he didn't have his magic 8-ball anymore. He didn't have the prophet. How am I going to find God's will? We're in real trouble. What are we going to do? Because in the past, they'd be in trouble, but he would go to Samuel and Samuel would say, well, do this, and it'd work out. But what are we going to do? Now, it also says he removed, which seems kind of random, but it's going to become important in this story. Saul had expelled the mediums and spiritists from the land. Who are they? What is that all about? Spiritists are people who go to the wrong team for information, right? Like evil spirits and demons and that kind of stuff. And we have those today, fortune teller kind of people and that kind of stuff. And mediums we have around today too. Mediums are people who claim to be mediaries between our world and the world of the dead, who can communicate to dead people. And you see those people on TV and sometimes, and really, God is the only one who can allow that to happen legitimately. So that's either fake, and I think a lot of it's fake, or it's satanic. Either way, it's not good. Either Satan fakes it or people fake it. And that's why, you hear them on TV and they'll say things like, so this person that you're thinking about, did they smile a lot? And I'm like, no. Yeah, because the person I'm thinking about is not smiling. So yeah, I can see him. He's not smiling. You'd be like, but sometimes they do get information like, wow, how's that? And I'd say that it's probably the wrong team. It's probably Satan. It's not a good thing to do, okay? And the good news is he has kicked them out of the land. That's good, but again, that's going to become important. So he doesn't have his magic 8-ball. He doesn't have his prophet. How's he going to find the will of God? And so he tries all the means he has. He inquired of the Lord. He did want to know God's will. Like, he'd be interested in this series. Like, he wants to know, which one do I pick? What do I do? He inquired of the Lord, but the Lord did not answer him, either by dreams or Urim or prophets. So first he tries dreams. So I guess he prays that God will, reveal something in a dream. He drinks some hot chocolate, gets his favorite pillow, his teddy bear, goes to bed, waiting for the dream and no dream. And then the Urim, what is that all about? Well, Urim are these little dice kind of things that the priests would use and God would honor this at times, the priests would use to try to discern God's will about what to do. But the problem here is that some years earlier, Saul had gotten really mad at the priests for the advice they gave. He didn't like it, so he had them all killed. He killed all the priests. So that's not going to work. And then the prophets. Now Samuel, the main prophet, was dead. Evidently there was more than one prophet, these spokesmen for God, and we're not told, but evidently he goes to them and they're like, yeah, God's not saying anything. Like he's silent. And so Saul is freaking out. Now, I don't know if you've ever felt desperate to know God's will or not. If you've ever been in a dilemma, some, problem, some crisis or some crossroads where like, I don't know what to do, and I want to do the right thing, and you'll do almost anything to find God's will. Like, what am I going to do? And in this case, he goes the wrong direction. You know how we talked about the mediums and spiritists that he kicked out of the land? He decides, hey, I don't know what else to do. God's not talking. I need my magic 8-ball. I need to talk to Samuel, who's dead. So I'm going to go out of the country and find one of those mediums that I've expelled and see if they can call Samuel up from the dead so that I can talk to him and get God's will. That's not a good plan. If you're writing notes, that's not good, okay? Don't write that one down as a tip. It's not going to end well. But he does. So he goes, disguises himself so people can't tell he's the king. He goes and finds one of these people. It's this lady. He says, can you do this? Yeah, I can do that. And he says, well, I'll give you the money, but I need you to call up this guy named Samuel, like the prophet. And she's like, well, that's a big one. But yeah, that's what I need. And can you do that? Yeah, sure, I can do it. So she goes through her either faking it or Sataning it, I don't know, or some combination, and she starts doing her or whatever she's doing, right? I don't know what they do, but she's doing her thing. And you know what happened? She gets totally freaked out. You know why? Because it actually works. Like God's the only one who can allow that to happen, to bring a spirit of somebody from where they are to here, and God lets it happen. And she's freaked out more than anybody. She's like, holy moly. And so when the woman saw Samuel, she cried out at the top of her voice and said to Saul, why have you deceived me? You're Saul. Because he figured the only way God would do this is because unless you're somebody like Saul, you look like, why, she's just going nuts, right? Because it actually worked. And then, I went too far. And I'll just read you the rest because it's long rather than trying to watch the slides. So the king said to her, don't be afraid. What do you see? And the woman said, well, I see a ghostly figure coming up out of the earth. What does he look like? He asked. An old man wearing a robe is coming up, she said. And then Saul knew it was Samuel. Anybody else have some questions after that, by the way? Yeah. Like, what kind of robe was it? No, not that question. But right, we do have, and I don't know the answer. And he bowed down and prostrated himself with his face to the ground. Samuel said to Saul, why have you disturbed me by bringing him up? I was good, man. What are you doing? I'm in great distress, Saul said. The Philistines are fighting against me, and God has departed from me. He no longer answers me, either by prophets or by dreams. So I've called on you to tell me what to do. He needs guidance. And Samuel said, why do you consult me now that the Lord has departed from you and become your enemy? The Lord has done what he predicted through me. I already told you what he was up to. The Lord has torn the kingdom out of your hands and given it to one of your neighbors, to David. Because you did not obey the Lord or carry out his fierce wrath against the Amalekites, the Lord has done this to you today. The Lord will deliver both Israel and you into the hands of the Philistines, meaning you're going to lose. And tomorrow you and your sons will be with me, which means what? Dead. The Lord will also give the army of Israel into the hands of the Philistines. Immediately, Saul fell full length on the ground, filled with fear because of Samuel's words. It's a principle of the path. See, Saul thought guidance was about, just the little decisions and shaking up the 8-ball. But what he learns the hard way is, no, it's really about the path that we're on. And that God guides those who are on the path, and our path determines the destination. And he was on a path of not obeying God, doing what he wanted to do, which led predictably to a destination that wasn't so great. And so let's think about this a little bit for us. Our path determines these are the two principles today. Our path determines our destination more than our individual decisions do. And God guides those who are on the path. Let's talk about that first principle first. That our path, even more important than our decisions, influences our destination. That what a lot of us need is not a new decision. We need a new direction in some area of our life. Because again, that's how this works. God has already revealed his general will for us in various areas of life. And if we go down that pathway, it's going to probably end up at a good place because that's why God gave it to us. He's wise. He knows. And when we're on the path, we actually start thinking, we grow in wisdom, and we're able to make decisions in line with God's will, and God guides us. That's the way this works. Well, let's think about that in different areas of life, just to make it concrete. It's our financial area of life, finances. God has given us a lot of wisdom in the Bible that's easy to disregard about how to handle money and just go down our own path versus, right? I mean, God just told us. A lot of things. Like, for example, the Bible tells us, don't spend more than you make. It's no fun. It's easier to spend more than I make, right? Go down my own pathway. But spend less than I make. So I don't go into consumer debt and all that kind of stuff. I'm going to spend less than I make. And then the Bible tells us what to do. When I spend less than I make, I'm not just going to spend it all. I'm going to set aside the first percentage of my income to give, because God tells us to have a generosity-driven life, a God-driven, focused life. And so I'm going to set aside the first percentage of my income to give to God and His work in the world through His church, to give to God, to help the poor, all that. So that's the first thing. And then I'm going to set aside the second percentage of my income to save for the future, because there's going to probably come a time when I'm going to need it. Either I'll lose a job or some downturn or some need or retire or whatever, and I'm going to be wise enough to save, and then I can live on the rest and enjoy it to the glory of God. That's a general view of what the Bible says about how to handle money. And if we do that, it really is wise. I mean, everybody who's been on that path would say, yeah, I'm glad I was on that path. But it's not the easiest path. It's easier just to spend money or do what we want to do. But our path determines our destination more, and we get fixated financially. Well, do I buy this car or this car? Do I buy this house or this? Do I invest here or here? And those are irrelevant, this kinds of questions, if we're not on the path. Make sense? Or another area of life. Let's go with relationships. In fact, we'll make it specific. We'll talk about romantic relationships, like dating and marriage. And anybody, you feeling romantic yet? It's still too early. I think it's still a little bit too early in the day. So we're going to get some help feeling romantic so we can talk about this, okay? So I don't know anybody more helpful than Barry White. So can you help me out? There we go. Some of you need to be introduced to Barry White. You don't know. And he was married forever, by the way. I don't know if you know, but every song he wrote, evidently he played to his wife first. She's the first person who heard it. It's kind of big. You feeling it yet? Now, I made a mistake Friday night. I let this go on too long. We had couples leaving early, and so I'm gonna limit this a little bit. Just it's a dilemma here a little bit. Okay, I think that's about enough because he's about to get going. So okay, yeah. So let's talk about the romantic part of our life a little bit, right? Dating and marriage. Let's talk about dating. I mean, let's say, man, I really want God to guide me to the right person to date or the right person to marry. I want to get married. I want to be in a dating relationship. I want to, and okay, well, God's given us a lot of wisdom about that. So, and the most important one, I mean, if we're a Christ follower, and I know that's a big if, not all of us here are, but if we're a Christ follower, then the Bible tells us we should be married to someone who shares that same faith commitment. So I need to be praying for a Christ follower. And I think we'd say, well, we want somebody who's not just sort of checks that list, but say, no, I'm really devoted to Jesus and somebody who's growing in love and growing in maturity and becoming healthier because they're allowing God to transform them and they're working on their stuff and they're getting, like that's the kind of person we want. And so that's who we're praying for, and which is fine to pray for that. But more importantly is to get on the path first. And what I mean by that is a path of becoming the kind of person that we're praying that we'll meet one day. That's way more important than just which one do I choose. Because here's the deal. The person that we're praying for, guess what? They're praying too. That God would guide them to a person who's devoted to Jesus, who's growing and becoming healthier, being transformed and open and all, and devoted to Jesus. And you know what? If that's who they're praying for and you're not that person, guess what? They're not praying for you. They're praying that God would keep them away from people like you, right? Even though you're praying for them. And so way more important to say, I'm going to work on me. I'm going to allow God to work on me. I'm going to devote myself to Jesus and be on the path of becoming the kind of person I want to date or marry one day, and much more likely for God then to lead me and guide me to that person. That's way more important. Or marriage. God's given us a lot of help. Marriage isn't easy. And if you're struggling in your marriage, join the club. Right? Marriage is a wonderful thing. God made it to be good, but it doesn't mean it's easy. And so the Bible tells us that, hey, there's a path here of how to build a solid marriage, two people becoming one. Why do we think that would be easy? So we're going to learn how to do that, and we're going to humble ourselves, and we're going to be open to working on us, not fixating on, well, they need to change. Focus on, well, I need to change. I need to learn. And fixating on preferring one another in love and sacrificing for the other person and loving the other person and doing all the stuff that the Bible says that we should do. And that's the path. And getting help. If we're stuck, we're going to get help because we're going to be wise enough to do all that's on this path. And yet what people do is they get an alternative path, not willing to do all that. and then it doesn't end well, it's not going well, and they're like, well, obviously this isn't working out. We don't love each other anymore. We must, husband one is not going to work, or wife one's not going to work. I need husband two, or wife two, and I need God's guidance. People will come to me and for God's guidance on how to go through getting another wife or another. And I was like, whoa, wait a minute. You already have one, right? And so let's focus on that. Let's focus on making it work. And that may be a harder path, but I'm telling you, this one's a fool's path. And so let's get on a path, right? But God's told us about that, right? And we keep going with this. Let me give another example outside of relationships. A positive example, and that's Martin Luther King. This is Martin Luther King weekend, and tomorrow's Martin Luther King Day. Tonight is at the Legacy campus, at 6 o'clock, is a concert and event. It's bigger than a concert, but an event to honor his life and legacy. It's going to be awesome. It's not just art. It's a bunch of people from the community, from different aspects of the community that will be here. It's going to be fun. It's going to be great, but it's also going to be a really important conversation because we not only want to honor his life and legacy, we want to extend his legacy, and we want to take steps further and deeper. As a multi-ethnic church, can I beg us all, can we come? And so that we can continue to not only honor him, he deserves that, but even more importantly, to say, hey, let's keep taking steps. But anyway, so that's tonight, 6. Well, when you think about him, he faced dilemmas all the time. And the dilemmas that they faced a lot were, how do we respond to blatant injustice and racism and violence against us? And I'm telling you, easier path would be, I'm going to retaliate. You blow up my house, I'm going to blow up your house. You put me in prison, I'm going to do something bad to you. You're right. I mean, that's what's natural. That's the natural path. But they were like, you know what? He was a Christ follower. He was a pastor. And he said, Jesus has already told us. He's already revealed to us generally how to respond to our enemies, which are people who are trying to hurt me. And Jesus said, we love them. We pray for them. We do good to them. Jesus said, we don't return injury for injury or insult for insult. We return love for injury and insult. Like we return respect for insult. So that's the way we're going to roll. We're going to roll Jesus' way. And they did. And it wasn't easy. But and that guided every decision they made. And I believe that's why they arrived at the destination they did in accomplishing as much as they accomplished, because they were on a path of wisdom. So it's the principle of the path. So the question we always have to ask is, it's not just about my decisions, it's about my direction. And do I need a new direction in some area of my life? And when we start going down God's path, there's Martin Luther King, we need to understand that opens us up to something very important. That is God's guidance, because God guides those who are on the path. See, Saul learned that the hard way. He was on his own path and then was hoping that God would guide him. It's not the way it works. As we're going to see in some other passages, God's guidance is for those who are on the path of obedience, who are, you may have been off path and gotten in trouble, and now but God, he'll guide you if you change direction and get on the path. Because think about it, why would God guide us down a bad pathway? I mean, he's too loving for that. Why would he give us wisdom on how to destroy ourselves? He guides people who change direction. He guides people who say, okay, I want to be on the path. Even if I've screwed everything up, I'm going to change direction. I'm going to be on the path. Just listen to some of these passages. I had a bunch of them. I'm just going to tell us two. David's son, Solomon, in Proverbs 3 says, trust in the Lord with all your heart. Do not depend on your own understanding. Seek his will in all you do, and he will show you which path to take. But notice it's conditional. First, we have to trust in the Lord, meaning I'm going to say God's way is better than my way, and I'm going to bend to his better way. And then his guidance is available. Don't be impressed with your own wisdom. Instead, fear the Lord and turn away from evil. Get on the path. Then you will have healing for your body and strength for your bones. God guides those who are on the path. Or Romans 12. And so, dear brothers and sisters, I plead with you to give your bodies to God because of all he's done for you. Let them be a living and holy sacrifice, the kind that he will find acceptable. And here he's using the image of Old Testament worship when they would go to the temple and make these sacrifices. And he's saying, now I want you to think of yourself as that sacrifice. Be just as dedicated to God as that sacrifice was dedicated on the altar. Meaning be as much as possible, just get on the path of obedience. Don't copy the behavior and customs of this world. Don't just think and live like everybody else, but let God transform you into a new person by changing the way you think. Then you will learn to know God's will for you, which is good and pleasing and perfect. Now, in this series, isn't this what we want? We want to learn to know God's will for us, the one that is good and pleasing and perfect. That's what we want. And Paul's saying, cool, you can get it. But what do you have to do? You have to get on the path. I'm going to dedicate myself to God. I'm not just going to live like everybody else. I'm going to get on the path of obedience to Him. Now, we'll talk next week about, well, then how does that work? Let's say you're on that path, and how does God guide specific decisions? Next week, we'll focus on that. That's what we'll be talking about. And God will guide us that way. But first, there's just something more important to talk about, and that is the path. Am I on the path or not? Because I think it's easy to think of God sort of like a magic 8-ball. And we want to, figure out, how do I shake God up and let him so he'll make the decision for me? But we'll see next week, that's not the way it works. It's not transactional, it's relational. What God wants is for us to be in relationship with him. And in that relationship with him, as we're going down the path of obedience to the wisdom he's already revealed, to be open to him relationally, to learn to hear his voice and to yield to him. It's a relationship. And it's a relationship where he doesn't just as we'll see next week, doesn't just make the decisions for us. We make decisions so that as he's changing the way we're thinking, like we become wise too. It's not just he's wise and he's going to answer everything. He wants us to become wise. But the first step in that is, I need to have a relationship with him. If it's relational, and be on the path. So are you on the path? And that starts with a relationship with Jesus. In a little bit, we're going to pray, and it'll be an opportunity. If you don't know, you think, I don't know if I have a relationship with God or not. You know what that means? Or some of you are like, well, I'm not quite ready for that, which is cool. If you're not ready, you're not ready. But some of you be like, you know what? I get it. If Jesus came here to die on the cross for my sins so that I can be forgiven, so that the barrier between me and God, the guilt of my sin, can be removed, so that he not only forgive me, but begin to come in my life and change me and transform me and help me down the path of his wisdom, I'm in. That's what it means to be a follower of Jesus. This would be a great week to say, that's what I want to do. But for those who say, well, I am a follower of Jesus, then the question is, are you on the path? And let me just say, to all of us, hey, let's not answer that too quickly. Let's not just say, oh yeah, I'm on the path. Because alternative paths are so subtle, and it's so easy to get off path. And my guess is every one of us in this room, I promise you, we're not living 100% on path in every area of our life. And a great way to ask ourselves that is, in different areas of our life, what are you doing now that you know you shouldn't be doing? Like, you know what? In this area of my life, I know this is not good, and I'm justifying it. Or what are you not doing that you know you should be doing? Those are just great questions to ask, to say, am I on the path or not? I mean, think about that. As we talked about different areas of life, like finances that we talked about earlier. I mean, we talked about generally that path, and you know if you're on the path or not. I mean, are there things that you're just spending money in ways that you know, yeah, God wouldn't be pleased, or that's just not a good way to go, or yeah, I know I'm supposed to be giving and the first part of my income, and I know I'm supposed to be, but I'm just not really doing that. Okay. Well, why not get on path and take steps to get on path? Or in our relationships, as we talked about our romantic relationships. I mean, let's talk about the sexual part of that. Because we're in a culture that is not on path when it comes. I mean, and God he's the one who made sex up. It's like a good thing. He wants it to be awesome. But he made it to be way more powerful than we tend to think of it. So he made it to be this powerful, not just body thing or enjoyment thing, it is that, but more than that, to be a soul connection between two people, be like this powerful soul glue, and it's powerful. And therefore in marriage, God wants us to be on a path to learn how to make that good, but even more importantly, he wants to not treat it cheaply. And so if you're not married and you're treating it cheaply and just sleeping around or whatever outside of marriage, that's actually a dangerous, unwise thing to do. You're harming yourself and other people, whether you realize it or not yet. Or if you're married and you're not faithful, either you're cheating on your spouse with another person, or you're cheating on your spouse with pornography, which Jesus said anything like that that's adultery too. Then you need to adjust path and to say, yeah, it may be difficult, but I need to leave that path and I need to get on path. And you may need help to do that, especially like well, in any of those examples. I mean, probably it'd be really good to get help to do that, like Thursday nights for new or just in your group. Which leads me to another part of this is I think the chances of you and me staying on path by ourselves are about zero. And the Bible is really consistent on that. That if you and I are going to stay on path, we cannot do it alone. If you and I are going to leave some alternative path to get on God's path and stay on that path, we need the help of other people, which means we need to be in community. That's why the Bible talks about so much about one another's, that we one another each other on the way to godliness down the path. And without each other, we're hopeless, every one of us. To love one another, encourage one another, support one another, pick one another up when we fall, to challenge one another, to admonish one another, like in Galatians 6, which means to have people in our life who are willing, when we start getting off path and we're good about justifying bad pathways, to have somebody in our life who loves us enough and knows us enough to say, yeah, I'm getting in the way. If you go down this path, you're going to have to go through me. Because I can't sit back and watch you do this to yourself and your family or whatever, your career or whatever it is. Right? We need each other to be. And therefore, if you're in a group, let me encourage you to make that group a priority and make it more authentic than it is. And if you're complaining about, well, it's just not as authentic, well, then make it authentic, be authentic. And if you're not in a group, get in a group or pull one together. In fact, this is the perfect time to do that in the Pick One series. That's why we do these kind of series. Part of it, it's not just a relevant topic, it is, but it's also an easy topic to begin relational connection. And either to jump into a group or to, as you'll hear from your campus host about how to do this, or to get the materials. I mean, it's a DVD discussion and then these written materials, a book. And the reason we do that is to make it super easy to pull a group together and lead a group. I mean, it's just kind of done for you. You just have to do the discussion. And one of the great things to do is either get in a group or even better, just pull a group together. You can do it as your family, but even better than that, I think, is pull a couple families together or individuals or singles or couples or whoever, and just some neighbors or coworkers or friends, and just say, let's do this together for this amount of weeks to begin the kinds of relationships that will keep us on the path. Because again, all this is about the principle of the path. And that way more than our decisions determines our destination. And God then guides those who are on the path. And we'll talk about that part next week. But now let's go to God in prayer about the path. And as I often do, and if you're new, I'll just tell you, when we go to God like this in prayer, you don't have to be intimidated about prayer. God is our Father. He loves us. He just wants us to talk with him. So you don't have to use some kind of flowery, churchy kind of language or anything. Just talk to him the way you talk to your dad, okay? And for some of you, this is an opportunity to get on the path relationally with God, maybe to begin a relationship with Jesus in your heart, to say, God, Jesus came to make it possible for me to know you, to remove the guilt of sin, to not only forgive me, but to come into my life and change me and give me wisdom in all these areas of life to follow you, and I'm in. If that's what it means to have a relationship with you, God, I want to start that right now. That's what it means to begin a relationship with Jesus. And then for others, just ask God, where am I off path? Whether it's in my finances or my relationships, my career, school, whatever. Just convict me. Is there something I'm doing that I know I really shouldn't be doing? And is there some things I'm not doing I know I really should? And would you not only convict me, but give me the courage it takes to get on path and to get connected to other people who can help me stay on path? Father, thank you for your patience with us in the process, for giving us the wisdom you've given us, for laying out the path. And pray you continue to guide us. In Jesus' name, amen.